So look, guys, why don't we do this? Yes, so I am the founder and managing director of Agentic Group. We do lots of different things and have been I've been in the blockchain and digital since 2011-ish, or mid 2011. We've done a lot of things in the space. You can go to my website, you can look at that. That's no big deal. It's not about me today. It's about Patrick and Douglas. So Patrick, why don't you start by giving us a little bit of insight into yourself, then we'll go to Douglas. We don't have a lot of time, so we'll get it rolling.
Hi, everyone. My name is Patrick. I work for Samsung SDS as the VP for Artificial Intelligence. I've been personally a mathematician and in the AI space ever since I got my PhD in it in the late 90s. So I approach it from that angle, and in that area, we do machine learning and artificial intelligence projects pretty much throughout the entire use case portfolio. As you might be familiar with the Samsung devices, from phones, watches, displays, washing machines, the whole gamut. And we need natural language processing, time series forecasting, image classification, all the rest of it. We do that within the Samsung Group as well as for others. Mm-hmm. So I get to play in a lot of different ponds.
Very cool. My phone can't look at my picture and start my washing machine, and I call you?
You could. Yeah.
Okay. Douglas, tell us something about yourself, my friend.
Hi, my name is Douglas Horn. I live here in Seattle. My company is GoodBlock, and we're developers of blockchain technologies. And we really focus on what we think of as more foundational Web3 technologies like decentralized storage systems and decentralized voting systems and things like that. I also am the person who kind of got the ball rolling on the Telos blockchain, which is a third generation blockchain that focuses on governance as one of its core features. So I've been, and my company developed a number of technologies, largely open source, some proprietary, and some hybrids that we think are really foundations moving forward in data governance and digital identity.
That sounds great. We're going to dive into the Telos stuff a little bit. So, but before we do that, since we again have a short window of time, we have 30 minutes, I believe. We're going to cover four basic things, four basic points. One is the larger problems that we're facing and that institutions more specifically face with data security, how automation is improving and what's coming next, the advent of non-custodial data applications, meaning owning your own digital footprint, and that effect on data security, and then investigation about what these gentlemen, and maybe even I'll chime in on what we see as a need in the industry moving forward. So let's get to that first one. Then we will take a couple of questions if we have some time, but let's start in. Let's go back to you, Douglas. I mean, in your opinion, what are the biggest issues that institutions are facing in data security?
Well, there's a lot of issues right now, but I think this week something very timely that we think about in data security and data governance is look at what happened with both Twitter and Parlay this week as sort of examples, right? Data governance today is largely very centralized, and the outcome of that, one of the outcomes that's very visible, is Twitter blocks somebody's account, and it becomes based largely on their own decisions, their own business decisions, and that has impacts and outcomes. At the same time, you look at Parler, and they fail to regulate, fail to interface well in their data governance and the compliance side and whatnot, and essentially lose all their partners and are almost a non-entity now. I think that if you think about these things, if you think about both the ability to just stay the existential issue of good data governance, both in terms of maintaining compliance, but also maintaining the favor of your users and having good processes. I think this is the cutting edge right now of where the hard decisions are going to be made in data governance. I think we all know about the issues of hacks and things like that. Those are ingrained very much in people's minds and haven't been solved yet. But I think we're really getting into this idea of governance and who gets to verify, who gets to decide, who gets to make these decisions, and I think that's going to be a big issue going forward.
Thank you for that. I think what was unsaid, or what was implied by what you said, was sort of First Amendment rights and who has rights to do what within governance platforms, right? Identity being at the crux. Let me kick that over to you, Patrick.
Yeah, I mean, I can only fully agree with what's been said so far. I think the HIPAA laws in medical data are a good standard or a good light post on the right way forward with non-medical data. Really, the conclusion being that data related to me belongs to me. And I should be the one to decide what anybody does with my data. Whether that's my surfing history, what websites I've been on or whatnot. Now that's of course not the case. The big companies, we all know who they are using that data, and the fact that I have an account or a profile on some of those platforms, I am obliged to sign a complete waiver to the rights of all my behavioral data over to them, which is a huge problem. Now, in some countries, like the United States, we don't care too much about it. In some other countries, like the European ones, they care a great deal more about that. And there are now laws passed by individual countries and the European Union as a whole that restrict this quite significantly. Yeah.
I'm sorry, I cut you off. Please go on.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's just I think there is now some precedence in terms of lawmaking coming from Europe, and I think this is going in the right direction. It gives more power to the individual that generated the data, and I think that should be adopted more widely.
Let's unpack that one a second. I think that's really important, Douglas. But when we talk about block and digital assets in regard to owning one's own data and permissioned environments as to when and how to parse that data, then we're getting into really the bifurcated, or rather the two ends of the hydra, right? The two heads of the hydra on the blockchain spectrum. One is security and ownership and authentication, and the other is payment rails, right? So are you of the mind then that people should be paid for their data? And like, should Facebook consider a model maybe using Libra? They'll never do this, but to say, we're going to use this, we want permission to use this part of the data or that to give to Johnson & Johnson or Merck Pharma or whomever, and we're going to pay you in Libra for that. Now that transaction could be completed on one blockchain, that bifurcated transaction, a two-way transaction rather. So, I mean, Douglas,
technically that certainly can be done. I would say that my belief is that people should own their own data. They should be in control, and once they do, then the option, the commercial option to sell that becomes available. But it should be an opt-in issue for those. People have varying beliefs and values of what their data is. Right now, it's pretty easy to just do a big scrape of everything. I mean, there are services out there that have basically scraped all data from Facebook and Twitter and everything, right? And put them into much of the genie's really, really out of the bottle, but we have to figure out what we're not going to fix that, right? But we have to figure out how we move forward. So I think that when you have a system that is inherently built on centralized servers, it's very hard to have decentralized governance and decentralized identity, where people control themselves. In this current situation, that's why it's so important to move into Web3. And when you talk about the two ends of the spectrum, interestingly, blockchain is in many ways just as its own product. a very difficult solution for privacy because everything is public. That's one of the reasons that that my company GoodBlock has spent so much time building our decentralized cloud storage platform, dStore, because that allows us to actually encrypt and hash and have the best of both worlds, right? Hashed information on the blockchain and deletable, forgettable, GDPR compliant information on dStore, decentralized storage. These are systems that have to work in tandem, or else we just can't achieve what we want. And I think that the third leg of that triangle is governance. Whether it be a full, broadly public, decentralized blockchain like Telos itself, or a private blockchain, or like a hybrid, like a consortia blockchain, right, where everybody in the airline industry is making their decisions. You want to know that the ability to update the protocol is both fair and decentralized, and also efficient. You know, right now, when you look at industry consortia, they spend a lot of time. Just debating what any changes could be. That could be made more efficient with blockchain governance, and we built a really powerful engine for that called Telos Decide, that has both the public open source version and then a private version for private consortia and whatnot. And I think that when you have those three pieces are the necessary minimum. You know, the sort of blockchain proof, immutable ledger, the more mutable system of storage, and then a way to actually govern it. That's sort of the trinity for a lot of these things we're talking about today.
So, Patrick, do you agree with that? And if so, if you don't, please let me know as well. Let us all know. But how are you / Samsung SDS addressing those issues with both conceptually, product-wise, and what comes next in your thinking after that?
Yeah. So, I mean, first of all, coming back to your original question, can we monetize the data on an individual level? I think no. That's unrealistic for the very simple reason that data becomes valuable only in aggregate. My web surfing history doesn't have a value, but 10 million people's surfing history it does, right? So the data is valuable to the Facebooks and the Googles of the world because they have everybody's data. But purchasing one data point from an individual, that doesn't have a value. And even if you did assign a value of some fractional cent to an individual data, paying that out, coming up with a transaction, even a blockchain, certified and whatnot transaction of 0.5 of a cent for your collective surfing history, that's not something that you as an individual would be interested in doing. If you could
but
get
there's different kinds of data, right, with different values. So if it's my surfing data, perhaps that's true. But if it's my genome, right, then it may have a lot more. If it's my genome and I have a certain gene that people are looking for to do research on, then it becomes very valuable. And I think that we have to realize there's a spectrum of the value of information. And I apologize for him.
You're talking about royalties too, Douglas. Sorry, Patrick, go on. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Douglas is perfectly correct. Of course, different data related to me has different values, and certainly my genome or maybe my medical data, especially if I'm somehow if I'm in a so-called edge case, right? If not the normal person, but if I have some genetic anomaly, maybe my genome is very valuable. Maybe if I'm just a regular dude, my genome is less valuable, and so on and so forth. So you could consider doing something like that. But the companies that are currently under public scrutiny and attack for using personal data are using the data that, in fact, we input into Facebook and LinkedIn and those kinds of portals. So that's pretty simple-minded data. And from an AI perspective, again, even if I do want to do genome-type work, I need lots of genomes to enable that, right? And then if I, as the company who wants to work on that, I need to purchase let's say, a million genomes one by one, that becomes very difficult. And so that would then basically practically create the market for data aggregating companies that do nothing but aggregate data and resell it to the people who that actually want to make use of it. So you'd be, I think, creating a new economy if you decided to do something like that.
Indeed. So how is Samsung approaching?
It'll happen.
Yeah, I think it'll happen. It may not be in something of that direction. There'll be some sort of application that allows us to monetize data, our personalized data in individuals making an aggregate, sort of just like we would answer a poll. That sort of aggregation. But
there's such a market actually on Telos right now called unbiased.ml that it actually is. It's not using personal data. It's a decentralized way to create data sets and verify them. Like, so if driverless cars need pictures of traffic signs in every country, right? People can go out and collect those and validate those and do metadata on those, and there's actually got data governance on that, and together they create a valuable data set, which every AI system needs garbage, needs good data sets to work from. So I think that this is already happening, and I think that when you have one of the reasons we built Telos was so that there would be a true fast platform that could actually handle these kind of things, because you're right. Not only is selling your data for a nickel something no one's going to be interested in. There's a lot of platforms where it's much more send them that nickel. So we think that's very important.
Yeah, the rails can be expensive, and that's another issue. But Pat, I want to get back to Patrick's. What is Samsung doing in this regard? How is Samsung approaching data security and the maintenance and exploration thereof?
Yeah, well, I mean, we're a global company, so basically we default mostly to the more stringent laws and apply them universally. And at the moment, that's the GDPR set of laws in Europe. So in other words, it's complete opt-in approach by which the individual has complete ability to either allow the saving of data or forbid it. And the default is forbidden. So the data always belongs to the individual. And if the individual wants to proactively donate for free, I admit, his or her personal data, they can choose to do that.
Can you compare and contrast that, Douglas, with the Telos approach?
Well, so Telos, first thing to understand about Telos is there is no Telos company, right? No blockchain company. It's operated by over 50 individual companies around the world that are competing and cooperating to operate this. So there's no strict company policy. We do have actually very advanced sort of that people need to opt in to use the chain. Everything is public. We cannot permission. So people could come and type put any kind of information on the blockchain, and at some point that will become a problem. One of the and for my company, D-Store, there will be data on there that we can't excise and wouldn't want to. Fortunately, these things are all sharded, so there's no dirty picture on anybody's. There's a tiny little bit of encrypted, sharded, dirty picture. But our approach is, at least in the public blockchain space, is that we are a platform. We are a provider. One of the strengths is that we do have those 50 companies are in probably 30 countries, and not just Western European countries, but countries like Venezuela and Iran and and all kinds of countries around the world where there's a variety of laws, and we allow the local companies to obey their laws, but as an aggregate, we have a sort of a broader set, right? So if something is is illegal to pass. Is an illegal transaction in one country where a certain blockchain operator is operating, right? We just tell them, okay, if that, you don't have to, our rules say you don't have to support that transaction, but somebody else can. That can just be pushed again, and somebody else can in a block that they built. I think I got a little in the weeds. We're very open, and we essentially leave that to the each of the dApps and businesses that build on our platform. Obviously, when we do contracting, when GoodBlock does contracting work for organization, we encourage full compliance, and we find the most advanced ways to do so.
Okay, thank you for that. Patrick, we hear more and more about the inherent biases in AI. And I don't mean just racial bias. I mean, it could be bias to any given subset or set of individuals or processes or whatever. What is your personal, I'm not asking you for a Samsung response for that, because I don't want to have your lawyer in the room, but what's your personal take on that as applied to new, personal ownership, data systems?
Yeah, I mean, of course. So just a couple sentences as background. Any AI system has to learn something, and it does that based on example data. So you feed example data to the system, and it learns something, just like we learn something when we go to school. And then you take an exam. And, maybe some people get 100% on their exams, but typically you don't, right? Now, the difference between your 95% exam score in your high school math test and the 100% conceivable maximum, that's the bias, okay? So the bias of any AI system is the difference between its accuracy and the perfect score that you would hope to get. Now, with that as the backdrop, every AI system and every conceivable AI system will have a bias. There is no AI system that will have zero bias, right? Now, in the cases where there is things like racial bias, that bias existed in the data set, and that was fed to the algorithm. The algorithms are, they don't care about anything. They're just a piece of math that transforms data. So, for example, if you build a facial recognition system based on Caucasian faces and then apply it to African faces, that system will malfunction. And that's what's currently being done by governments and polices and so on and so forth. And that is not ethical. That should not be done. Those systems should not be used. Respectively, they should be trained with a better data set. That's where you get, racial bias into the system. But bias as such is something that we cannot go without, is unfortunately baked into the way we do AI. So how do we handle it? Well, we try to minimize it. And there's usually a couple ways to do that. The popular ways to do it are either get more data, which really underlies the worldwide obsession with collecting bigger and bigger data sets. And there's a law of diminishing returns, obviously. If I already have a lot of data points, adding another one data point adds very little extra information, which is why we're seeing exponential growth in size of data sets. The second thing you can do is make the model bigger. And again, especially in natural language processing, we're seeing models grow to an absurd extent, where the model itself can no longer fit into memory of a normal computer and so on and so forth, making it virtually unusable by ordinary people who don't have a data center at their hands. So bias is a huge driver, of course, in this field, but we need to assess: is it the kind of bias that you kind of naturally get because that's just simply the way AI works, or is it a bias that you get because you made some kind of human error in the construction of the data set? Or thirdly, you try to apply AI to something that you should never apply it to. So for example, a few months ago, the British government tried to score the A-level graduates. This is at the end of high school, entering university. They tried to give them their finishing high school scores by AI. Now, that's just something you don't do, right? Because you're about to ruin someone's life, by giving them a failing grade, even though they're a good student. So there are some real ethical issues out there with applying AI to the wrong stuff. And definitely that underlies, again, the desire to lower bias, but you really typically need to look at, did I get the right data set? Is the data set representative of the situation? Is it relevant to the problem I'm solving? Does it have the information I need to get the question answered? And if all that's true, then you're probably okay.
This is how insidious bias is in general, because Patrick, you actually started off your comment just now by assuming that by taking the data percent to 100% in a math test and being a polymath, you would say that. But actually, it's more like people usually, pass through school with 80% or 75%. So your mind goes, that's bias, my friend. Okay. Douglas, how do you respond to that, to all of that?
I defer to Patrick on anything related to AI. But I'll share my experience. I think that it is a growing area that's only going to grow. That's only going to become more important as an economy, meaning more money goes into it, meaning more when there are problems, they are bigger problems. I think that AI, I think this was a well-constructed fireside, because when you look at identity, when you look at these things, right? An identity is a collection of not just who you are and what your national, ID number is, but applications you have and health information, your genome, your travel. All of these things are going to be tied up into a form of digital identity. Hopefully we do it right, but there's no guarantee of that. AI is absolutely going to be a part of that. It's going to be applied to that constantly. And so this is why I think that when I was talking about the trinity, where you have to have governance, data governance come in and allow people to decide as communities what's acceptable, what's not acceptable. Right now, it's very centralized. We need to move this to where it's decentralized, because we're already seeing, there's already massive inefficiencies there when you have to look at different countries or jurisdictions and whatnot. Patrick, gave us an example as a large global company. Samsung obviously just sort of defaults to the highest level, but there's growth that has to happen there. So as these economies get bigger, as AI becomes more and more important and is imbued in every computing system that we have in some manner, and including and especially identity, we need to have ways to go in and make some decisions, and that can be very hard. There's some of these AI systems are black box, right? The one thing I would say is we created something called everyone knows what a DAO is, I think, a decentralized autonomous organization. We created a concept called a DHO, D-H-O, decentralized human organization, or holacratic organization. And the idea is that there is a human decision-making process sort of somewhere in the decision chain, so that it's sort of a Skynet fail-safe, but it also makes sure that we can maybe have the best form of governance that uses, humans aren't great at governance either. We have all these problems. We've done it for millennia, and we have problems every day. So my hope is that removing biases in AI, and from the system. No one is more biased than human beings, right? So if we can remove those, if we can use these tools and govern it along the way, we will have a better overall experience for ourselves and better governance, because that's absolutely where all these trends are leading, right? So if you have a DHO, then you're injecting human decision back into this, and yes, it hopefully prevents a Skynet situation, but it also just makes sure that AI is good at touching base back with humans, right? We look at these examples of AI created images from Google, and they look like, weird sort of, dog swirling cloud. It's weird, but the AI thinks that looks exactly like a dog, right? And to humans, we don't see
Okay.
in governance. We need to have it kind of touch back and say, no. This might seem great to the algorithm, but we don't accept that. So I think keeping humans inserted in that decision-making process is important.
That's a very good point. It all does come back down to human input whenever we do digitally. So we have a question. We're going to wrap up in about 5. Please get to one question here. This goes out to both of you, Patrick and Douglas. And Patrick, we'll start with you. This is from David Rankin. And he asks, what about recognizing bias and intending to go against such bias path? Well, I guess what David is trying to get at is in order to quell, the inherent bias in any given system, what if you were to put in, say, its opposite? And I assume something like that's already happening, but you can be more illustrative of that kind of thinking for us, please, Patrick.
Yeah, well, something quickly, training an AI model is the number one objective is always to reduce bias by whatever means you can. And if you look in the literature, everybody's looking at how to do that in the best way, right? So we tried this model, we tried that model, we tried this algorithm and that algorithm, and overall, it's this option that produces the lowest biased output. So pretty much you can rely that every AI researcher and developer will try quite a few alternative pathways, both in terms of model as well as an algorithm, to try to reduce the bias to its minimum. And bias is always the first and the main thing to be measured and tracked across all these experiments. So that's certainly being done. It's at the absolute center of doing AI. What is starting to hit people's minds is that there is an inherent bias in the data set itself prior to doing AI. And that is something very tricky to figure out. To what extent is there bias in a data set before you can quantify the bias of a model? So there are two different biases now. The bias of the AI model, very easy to quantify. We always optimize for that. We always are a little short of 100%. But then there is the bias of the data set. And there's an ongoing discussion now in research circles how to even quantify that, how to measure that, how to get a hold of it. And the bottom line is we still don't really know the answer to that question.
Douglas, I want your answer to that too. Thank you for that, Patrick.
I defer. I'd rather have another question than
something different. I actually want to.
Okay.
I want to twist that a bit for you, Douglas. So, chain authentication help in what Patrick just mentioned, which I consider that to be a great.
I'm sorry, you broke up. Can you say that again?
It would blockchain authentication, blockchain-based authentication, be of any help in the process that Patrick, the actual problems that Patrick just mentioned?
I think it can. I think that authentication. I think we have a long way to go in having a really functional digital identity until we can narrow people down to single individuals. There's always the risk of Sybil type attacks and one individual presenting themselves as multiple in the data. So I think we have a way to go. I don't think that's imminent, but eventually I think it will be helpful.
Okay, so we're almost done. We've got about a minute to go, so I want 30 seconds from both of you. Start with you again, Patrick. What's next? What's next? That could be conceptually, it can be a product, it can be just what you thought of in the bathroom this morning. What's next?
Thank you. Good question. For me in the AI field, I think my focus is on data labeling. This, in fact, also applies quite nicely to the banking sector, where you have a huge amount of data that requires human annotation to fully get the informative input to the situation. And then you can use both the raw data we gathered by sensors and by machines in the field with human input data that label, that annotation. And together, you can then combine the data and human domain knowledge into a single system. That is my focus at the moment. And I'd be happy to talk to anybody. I'm on LinkedIn if anybody wants to reach out and talk further. Thank you for having me on the show.
Excellent, Patrick. Thank you. Douglas, what's next for the Telos Armada and Douglas Horn?
Oh, well, to start off, I think when we say what's the biggest, I think the biggest technical debt we've had for a while, for years, is governance. It's been one area that's never really been disrupted. We still basically put marks on pieces of paper and hand them and put them somewhere and count them. So Telos has put a lot of effort into Telos Decide. You can see more about that at telos.net. It's a governance engine that handles all forms of governance, community committees, things like that. I think that, and it picks up really where social media like Facebook and whatnot have failed, right? They're good at getting people together, but then it doesn't really let them organize and do anything useful in most cases. So I think that this is something that we've worked on quite a bit. I think it's going to have a role both in all kinds of organizations, from enterprise, where of course it'll be of a subset of these options, but in just in people's homeowners associations and school boards and things like that, any kind of small government situations. I think we're going to see a revolution because people are. That's what I've been working on lately. Each of these sort of pieces with the decentralized storage and our, Telos identity and whatnot. These are all sort of pieces of that pie because they're all so interconnected. But these are the things that we've been stitching together, and that's what I'm going to keep working on because I'm very excited that we can finally give people a better way to conveniently, easily, transparently vote. And we come to consensus, whether that be with a nation or with a company or with a consortium or, with any kind of organization. Make it easy enough that people can do it and get used to it. I'm super excited about it, frankly. I think we need this. I'm always excited about it. So
yeah,
I ramble.
I want to thank you both very, very much for this. I've actually learned something. I will be reaching out to both of you later on. I urge everyone listening and viewing to reach out to both of these gentlemen if you want to learn something more about what they're doing. Thanks again, guys. Okay, have a wonderful day.